Let's see. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Healing Starts Here. Today we are going over reactivity at work with Greg Malone. And I know that everything that he has to share with us today is going to be very insightful. So I'll go ahead and give it away to Greg.
All right. Well, I thought maybe we could spend a little time talking about reactivity at work. I don't know about you, but I have found, especially during COVID, that my fuse feels a little shorter. And my
Definitely agree.
poor team members have had me snap at them, and then I have to go back and apologize. And I'm sorry, that's not the kind of leader I want to be. you know. Um, but I thought maybe what we could do is spend a little time talking about maybe why that happens, and then part of what goes with that reactivity, even after we are reactive, it can kind of spiral us down into potentially some sort of dark space. So, but I thought maybe what we could start with is an actual scenario, so that we could kind of get a sense um, as to what what that might look like on the floors. And Sarah was going to share a scenario with us. And then maybe I thought after we hear this scenario, we might, I don't know, just ask some questions about it and see if the scenario feels familiar, or if you have any similar sort of scenario. So, Sarah, would you like to share your scenario with us?
Yes, I would love to. Okay, so you are assigned to an IMCU patient who is 87 years old and has a history of pulmonary hypertension. He was admitted for respiratory failure and is now on the highest settings of his high flow nasal cannula. Intermittently, he is needing an additional non rebreather over the nasal cannula in order to keep his saturations up. The hospitalist has scheduled a family meeting with the patient and his son. The meeting goes smoothly, and they decide to transition the patient to comfort care. The doctor puts in a few orders and then leaves the unit. An hour or so afterwards, you receive a phone call. It is the same hospitalist for this patient. She says, "Hey, I was just calling to make sure that you are not going to take the patient's oxygen off." You are confused at first and ask, "Are you referring to the high flow nasal cannula?" "Yes," she says. "Please don't take the patient's oxygen off. Just because he's on comfort care doesn't mean you should take his oxygen off."
This actually happened for you, didn't it, Sarah? Do I? Yeah.
Yes, that's
Um,
correct.
and I'm wondering, I know we'll talk to Sarah about this, but Tammy, I know you're being pulled in many different directions, but does this scenario sound familiar in terms of like um, maybe potentially hearing some conflicting orders, or even like being told something and then not, it not being congruent with, I see Tammy smiling. She's like, oh yeah.
Yeah,
um, I-
definitely. I mean, I think it goes right along the lines of somebody being in no code and then something happens and their family comes rushing in and says, do everything, do everything.
right, right. Um, what about, I'm curious to know about people's experience, both Tammy and Sarah, like when the hospitalist calls you and says, hey, you need to keep that oxygen on. What goes on inside of you? Like, what do you are you do you like second guess yourself, or like what happens? Do you feel frustrated? I mean, whatever.
Yeah. So I think for me in this specific situation, um the patient was was pretty unstable. And so the fact that we had transitioned him to comfort care, like my impression was that we were going to leave the high flow on him, like regardless, he was just going to be able to have morphine in order to like help with his air hunger basically, and we wouldn't have
Mhm,
to go in and shove a non-rebreather on him every time his saturation fell. um
mhm,
so for me, when I got that phone call, uh I felt frustrated. I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna take the oxygen off. Like I already
mm,
know that,
mm, mhm,
um it felt it felt a lot of different ways that the doctor didn't mean for it to feel, but it felt demeaning, truthfully. Like,
mm,
yeah, I'm not here to kill the patient, you know what I mean? So
mm, mhm,
that
mhm.
was my experience. I don't know.
So it's sort of demeaning and almost like, how could the doctor even question my motive that way? I mean, I am a nurse doing this work to care for people.
Yeah.
Um, Tammy, have you had a similar situation or something like this as well?
Oh, I'm sure I have. I just can't think of one right offhand right now. So,
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the things that it always strikes me about moments like this is I think we can have a lot of things going on. One, I don't know if you ever have these days, but sometimes I come into work and I start the day off just feeling tired,
Mhm.
and just like I'm not in my best A game. And so like sometimes sometimes our reactions can be based on the fact that we're tired.
Yeah.
We have less bandwidth to engage life. And then, of course, there's the normal stress that comes with like COVID. But even the ICU is probably one of the more stressful places to work in the hospital, right? I mean, it's not necessarily the stress level in the ICU is going to be higher than it is down in nuclear science,
Yeah.
where they're just taking images of people,
Right. Exactly.
and so so there's that, and then you overlay the whole stress of COVID and the visitor policy and all of that piece, and um, so um, but then there's also this sort of thing of, I'm curious to know for you, Sarah, when this doctor calls you and says this, is there anything that happens after the call? Like, is there anything where you're like, do your thoughts take you somewhere else after the call? And it's like, okay, I already felt demeaned by this person and they were questioning my knowledge. I mean, what else happens? Do you have any sense?
Yeah. I think for me, yeah, and this is true of any time that I feel like because I in this moment I felt like my intelligence was being questioned, right? And um generally speaking, yeah, I think, well, in this specific scenario, I think I was just totally shocked by the phone call. It was like that hadn't even registered as a possibility in my mind. So I kind of was like, I felt a little bit like I got the wind kicked out of me or something, and then I, like, came to and was like, "Okay, what? Like, what is going on?" I had to kinda recalibrate, and when I did, I mean, yeah, during the phone call, I really don't remember what was going on. I remember when I hung up, my heart started racing,
Mm,
and I felt flushed,
mm,
and I immediately wanted to go talk to someone about it. I wanted to go tell someone, "Can you believe what this doctor just called and said to me?" Basically, I wanted to get like someone to validate that like I'm intelligent, I know better than that. So,
yeah,
that was what was
yeah,
happening for me.
yeah. Um, that kind of brings up maybe something that we can talk about. And I'm going to bring up some slides. Desktop, share, PowerPoint. All right, so one of the things that, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit, why does, why does reactivity even happen in the first place? Sometimes we just don't have the bandwidth, and when we're feeling tired, we're feeling taxed, we're already stressed, and that's going to happen to any one of us. I mean, that's just the normal. We're finite human beings, and we only have so much capacity. Then there's this sort of piece that can happen where we become reactive mostly because of what we think the other person thinks of us. So kind of the perceptions of other people. I think it's a fair statement to say, I think most of us want to be perceived well by others. And when we aren't perceived in the ways we want to, that actually becomes a very common doorway into shame. And shame, to be clear, is really about our identity. So a real simple way to think of shame is, you could say, I did a bad thing. That's one way to think of it. Shame says, I am a bad person, right? And so for example, if you're a mother, being seen as one who can capably balance work and the mothering duties without being overwhelmed. I've talked to many women who, I mean, honestly, I don't know how women do it in life. The amount of stuff that gets put on, our culture puts on the plates of women is just beyond me. As a man, that's just my observation. And I know even my description of that feels limited. Or if you're a nurse, it might be that you're perceived as lacking the knowledge, right? And Sarah, you mentioned that. Or there could even be this sense of like, maybe when you think about how other nurses think about you, it's this idea of they don't think I'm really pulling my weight on the unit. All of those thoughts can take us into kind of this doorway of shame. And when we go into that doorway, that's when we get really reactive. That's when we get, we say things we regret, our emotion becomes dysregulated. We might do things that later on you think about and you're like, man, I was not doing well. Why did I do that? And it's because you're in that reactive space. So what I wanted to do is spend a little time talking about what can we do with our reactivity when we're in that space? Like, how do we slow it down so that we're not like, there's a difference between responding and reacting. Responding is a thoughtful, sort of measured way to answer whatever's in front of us. Reacting is just, it's really amygdala sort of behavior, limbic system kind of stuff. So we talked about one thing in terms of what can we do about our reactivity. If you're feeling stressed, and we've spent quite a few sessions in Healing Start here talking about these kinds of things, building in things like relaxation time, exercising regularly can help with reducing stress. Doing some sort of mindfulness activities or a walk in nature, just sitting in a room quietly and just letting stuff kind of sit and come up. Or if you're tiredness, take a break. You know, the thing that I've learned about nurses, they don't eat and they don't go to the bathroom. Right. I mean,
Definitely.
so, and, but really taking the breaks that are allotted to you, right? Taking time away, planning in breaks. You know, I'm going to go do an Airbnb for a long weekend or something like that. And then just good sleep hygiene. You know, it's probably not going to serve you well if you go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning and you've got a 7 a.m. shift, you know? And then what about the third thing, the perceptions of other people? What can we do about our reactivity with that? Well, you're not going to like this. We can't control what others think about us. I've had to learn that the hard way. I can truly say that for many years, I thought my mom's opinion of me was what I absolutely needed to have.
Mm.
And it wasn't until I actually started letting that go that I was like, oh, yeah, I don't really need that. And it actually opened up a lot of freedom for me. But I had to choose to let it go,
Mm.
right? Um, so we can't control what others think about us. A hospitalist is going to think whatever they want to about you.
Mm.
But what you can control is you can control how you respond. Um, but we have to get to know ourselves, and we have to get to know those triggers inside of us that happen. So Sarah, you mentioned some of the triggers that were going on for you, whether you know it or not. Like you were talking about your heart racing, right? And a tight chest, and like listening to your body. Your body is you know, if you've read the book, it's called The Body Keeps the Score. It's all on the way trauma impacts the body and the memory of the body with in terms of taking in events. Listen to your body. That's the first thing you can do. The second thing is listening to what are those emotions happening inside of me. Is it anger? Do I withdraw? Do I become silent? Incidentally, those are very common reactions when we're feeling shame. Very common for people to get silent and withdraw. Part of it is because they're questioning now their own sense of who they are. And they're like, something's fundamentally wrong with me. Or, you know, if you develop tunnel vision, recognize, oh, I've got like this tunnel vision, like you can only think about that event that happened. You have a hard time getting it out of your mind.
Mm.
Right? Or the other thing we can do is we double down and we just try even harder. And so there's the idea of like, you know, well, you know, then it's my job to convince that hospitalist that I actually have the knowledge, you
Right.
know, that I'm good enough here,
Yeah.
right? With just honestly, what that does is it just sets you up to work even harder for something that you can't control anyway,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
Um, so so that's some of the things we can do in terms of responding to our shame triggers and that sort of reactivity that comes out of the shame. I also have a worksheet that I could provide people that I think might be helpful. I don't know about any of you, but for me, it can be helpful just to kind of sit with, you know, something that helps me think through, oh, what is it that I'm feeling, you know, and what is this event? How am I thinking that this event says something about me? What do I think it says about me? Because part of what happens is we really slip down into a place of our identity really starts to like feel threatened,
Mm.
or we even question our own identity, you know. So So that's a little bit of what I wanted to share. There's so much more to share about this, but I don't want to overwhelm the group. I don't know, Sarah, Tammy, tell me how this lands with either of you. I mean, does this seem to make sense or resonate, or is Greg off base? Greg's been off base before.
Um, I think I know for me, it definitely resonates. I think what's interesting is that piece of like the situation is fine until my identity is called into question, like some aspect of my identity. And like in this situation that I was talking about, it was my intelligence, but it could be any aspect of who we are as a person. We're
Mhm.
we're we're picking up information that's telling us this other person thinks that my identity is not this thing, like that I'm not intelligent or I'm not this or whatever. And you're saying that as soon as that thought enters our brain, that's when we go into this reactive sort of like have to scramble to respond. And that
Yep.
response is either or usually anger or withdrawing. Is that
Yep.
right?
Yeah, and the key in that is recognizing what's happening to slow the process down. So in other words, my heart's racing, I'm going into that space. Something's
Mm,
happening, right? That they're what some people call signposts. They're like saying it's like a thing that says, hey, you're starting to, go down, slip down into the, shame place
yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah,
And you're going into that area where you become very reactive, right? Sort
right.
of thing. Yeah.
That's hard to do, truthfully. Like to pick up on, oh, my heart's racing, that I'm like probably feeling reactive right now.
Completely. I
Yeah.
think it takes practice. I
Yeah.
think it takes practice, and I think we have to. I always recommend trying out the process with something that may not feel quite as charged.
Interesting. What would that look like? Like, would your handout be helpful for that, or like doing
Yeah.
a role play with a friend, or what would you recommend for that?
I think doing a handout, I can send this handout to everybody. And working with the handout might be a good starting place. And then from there, um, I fully think role playing would be really helpful, or specifically picking an issue that may not feel quite as high stakes.
I see. Okay.
Um, so it could be something as simple as, my wife and I can't agree on what we want to eat.
Mm,
um, and or let's say it differently. Let's say I cook something because I love to cook,
mhm.
and I think it's really good, and my wife, she doesn't care for it. That's a small sort of thing that
Yeah.
I can easily start to think she doesn't think I'm a good cook.
Mm,
She doesn't like the things I fix for us, you know. She doesn't appreciate me. Like I can go all those different directions
yeah.
and recognize in that moment, okay, let's think about this. What's really happening for you right now?
Yeah.
So, and it's not as high stakes at that point.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, I
Yeah.
will be happy to email out that handout too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think, yeah, it is so hard to, especially at work. I think, in the ICU, we are not slow. We're like running around, doing everything fast. A heart rhythm changes. You're in the room fast. Like everything's fast.
Yeah.
And it's the way some things are supposed to be, right? But
Yep.
it's hard to recognize like, okay, yeah, something's changed within me. I need to recognize that. And
And one of the things you can do in a fast environment like that is you can pause literally for like 15 seconds
mhm,
and take a deep breath. Take several really deep breaths and exhaling really slowly, and that will re-engage the parasympathetic system,
Mm.
um, which will help disengage the amygdala that's been activated in the
Mm,
limbic system.
fascinating. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I don't know, Tammy might be um
Might be
hanging out
doing
with those
some
grandkids. So
grandkid duty.
yeah. Um, so I think what I'll do is go ahead and stop the recording now.
Okay,
And then we'll see if we have some space for group discussion. But thank you so
great.
much, Greg. This was amazing.
Yeah, yeah, you bet.